Hello, Neil. This is part 3 in our EBR implementation guide. And this part will focus on POCs, POVs, and trials. What would you say are the steps that you would see, that we've followed to help companies move forward that use of the system? Could you cover those, Neil, in terms of the high-level steps or let's say important people, objectives to outline in the trial?
Yes, definitely. I mean, probably 6 or so basic steps that you should consider when thinking about running a trial or a POV, POC. I think always the first one is identify your stakeholders. Who is going to make the decision in the end? Because you don't want to put all this work into it and then find, if you'd asked this person or included them in the process, you would have got a better or a faster decision. So who are the influencers and decision makers in your organization that need to support the EBR implementation? Try and get them involved early and involve them in understanding what they need to know in order to support your project, and build those questions that they have into the objectives for your trial or your project. And maybe have the stakeholders visit the trial, to see what the software looks like and how people are getting on with that. That can be a real benefit. I think the second step can be defining the objectives of your trial. Create a short list of the things that you want to know from executing the trial, and use a little checklist to make sure that you're hitting those points during the trial. And one of the ways to test that is getting feedback. Make sure anybody who's been part of the trial, that you gather the feedback from them. It not just informs the decision about perhaps whether to buy that software or not, but perhaps would inform your change process, your project implementation process. Mm-hmm. I think thirdly, define the scope and plan out the trial. Make sure that's written down clearly. It doesn't need to be lengthy or extensive, but just keep it focused, and that way you can keep the trial duration short as well. That's good for you and good for the supplier, and helps you make good progress quickly. A simple plan with some checkpoints and some checking calls is an advantage.
Yeah, just to summarize, so we have the stakeholders, we have the objectives and the scope and the plan. When it comes to the stakeholders, could you speak about some of the people that would normally be involved when we say stakeholders, and let's say the type of role or departments that should be involved in this type of activity?
Sure, yeah. Usually, a critical group or department is production, who's running the batch process and managing those production of those batch records. Essential as part of that process is quality assurance. So trying to get your production director, your quality assurance director on board early on, they're key stakeholders. I think IT are very important because they usually have some constraints, some standards or requirements that systems have to comply with. Finding out what they are early on is a real advantage. And in a small company, that might be it. Production, quality, and IT might be able to implement a solution. Who has the finances? Do you need to get your finance director or your finance department on board early on? Do they have a process that they need you to follow to perhaps write a business case? So those are some of the key kind of, and certainly senior level people that I would class as important stakeholders. Never forget, though, the users. I think, the users being people who execute the process on the shop floor, but also the people who create the document. In your normal process today, if you're doing that on paper, you'll have an authoring, publishing process. Try and get those people involved because life will be different for them when you go electronic.
That's a very good point. And I think that's some advantage of a trial or a POC POV as well is that you can involve a wide range of people and create some momentum with those people into a project. And often, of course, you get very good feedback. It should not be a decision only by committee, right? To have the people who are actually really working with the system every day support it from an early stage can carry lots of energy into the project. And you mentioned the scope and plan as the third one, Neil, before we go on to the last three. But just briefly, how long do you think should be planned, or what would be typical from what you've seen and what we've done in terms of trials? Is this managed in a couple of weeks or a month, or what would you say is a appropriate timing?
I think you're on the money really with a couple of weeks to a month. I think that is the right kind of time frame for these. With a cloud solution, usually you can set up an area for the client to use, within a few days. The preparations for running a trial or a POV, if you're working with a company that's familiar with doing that, should only take a week or so, maybe 2 weeks. And then the execution of that trial, I would say try and keep it to a week or two. Probably, long enough to do a little bit of training, get your people familiar with the software, and then, a few days for them to execute some batches on it, and then time for a feedback session and a wrap up. So that's the kind of time frame that I think you are looking for. And then it's not too much of a burden, not too much of an investment from the company's point of view. And, at the end of that 2 to 4 week period, you to get a decision out of it. You decide that, yes, this is suitable and we want to proceed and go to an implementation, or no, it's not for us, and you move on and look for something else, and you've not wasted too much time.
Mm-hmm. So that's great. So it can be done pretty quick and with not too much effort internally. And what would be the other, you mentioned 6, Neil, so the other 3 key areas that we should look at whilst we're running a trial? I think I can guess the next one perhaps.
Yeah, how much is it going to cost? What should you budget for this? I think that's company specific, but if it's quick and easy to set up, then it shouldn't be too expensive. If you're just using the supplier's standard software, minimal configuration or no configuration, perhaps you're using a batch process that they've already built in the system, so you're not creating a special one for your company, then maybe you don't need to pay anything. Or maybe if you need some additional configuration, or you really need a batch process that is much closer to mimic your own, maybe you need to pay the company a little bit of money to set up that process. But yeah, generally pretty low cost or no cost for a simple trial, a little bit more for a POV or a proof of concept. I think the second tranche of my list of 6 is resources. Make sure you select resources to support the trial. Have a subject matter expert for your process. Try and get one of those people who currently author and publish the batch records. Get them to understand that process and how it will change. And get some operators, 1 or 2 operators, perhaps with a supervisor and a quality assurance person to be involved in the trial. So maybe half a dozen people could be involved in the trial, probably not much more than that. And then other people might just be observers of that. So yeah, identify the resources and give them time. You have to allow them time to work on the system really. But we're talking days of time, not full time for days. We're talking, a few hours over a few days. And then finally, evaluate. You've put all this work in, you've done all this planning, you've got all these people involved in this trial, this POV. Make sure you do a proper evaluation of it. That should be, your checklist that you set up at the start when you identified the objectives of your trial. Go back over that, gather the feedback, review it, and discuss the feedback with the supplier. It might be that you didn't have chance to try out a feature of the software that is really important to you. Don't make a decision until you discuss that with the supplier to understand whether you've given it a fair shot.
Thanks for that, Neil. Yeah, no, I also fully agree. The evaluation is really, really important. Often it can be quite apparent, the benefits and let's say how successful it was, but you do need to capture that, and it might be helpful for other people or management outside of the trial that want to see that. And you can use that as a basis. I think we mentioned ROI and the checklist up front, so you can match that back to see what you're actually getting. Now, we have had very good experience of running trials also in the last years remotely with COVID. I think that's something that we have seen as a really good results and has had a lot of benefit for our customers to actually be able to try EBR, which typically is not something which is easy to jump into, or you really get your hands on it far down the line after you've done a lot of work and investment. So I think that this is something in the more modern sense that we can evaluate and we can work with pretty quickly and get feedback from our operation. But based on the trials we've done, Neil, what would you say are the ways more, let's say, practically on the ground, if you like, that people are assessing the EBR? Just briefly, if you could speak to that and share some of your experience.
Oh, I suppose they are they're assessing the usability. How easy was it to learn how to use the system? How quickly could they perhaps configure it to suit their process? So those are certainly key features that people look for. And I think the switch to electronic is certainly an electronic system that's pretty easy to understand and pick up and use and guides them, through the process. I think, they start to enjoy their work a little bit more, and that's a real big benefit to people. And I think that's a major benefit from running a trial.
Mm-hmm. And in the trial, Neil, so are people really using this in their production facility, or is it more done in a, let's say, like a meeting room space, or a little bit outside of the manufacturing process? What have you seen that our customers have been doing and has been successful for the trials?
So I'd probably start by saying use it in your office, and just get familiar with the tool. You can just use it remotely from wherever you are. I think the next stage would be perhaps running something like what we might call a conference room pilot, where you sit round a table, a conference room table, and you all execute it together. So you might have your operator, your supervisor, your quality assurance manager, all operating the process together, and you get that interaction, that understanding with how it works for different people, and that can be very powerful. I think if you're then running a slightly longer sort of proof of value, then you might want to use your own batch record on the software. And so see how that can be developed into an electronic batch record, see what that looks like. And then if you're really wanting to test it out, then you perhaps run that side by side with your existing paperwork. Mm-hmm. So run the electronic batch record on the software alongside filling in a paper batch record and see the comparison, see how that will work for you and what you learn from that. And then finally, you can run that for real alongside an actual batch of production. So you can run it on plant. The people running the EBR can have a tablet, for example, that they use on plant, whereas the people using paper use their normal paper process. And you execute a batch in live production and record it twice, record it in parallel, and that is kind of the ultimate trial, I think, of an EBR.
Mm-hmm. We've seen that as a very nice outcome that customers, again remotely, managed to be able to really set up and configure the system largely themselves with some support, run it really in production with actual batches, and then make a comparison and ask their teams, to explain and to help quantify a bit in terms of where the improvement points are. So it could be batch review, the classic savings due to review by exception. and then electronic management of the whole record to be more efficient and accessing data out of the system, so on and so forth. So I think that direct comparison is something that's quite powerful and helps a lot of people to really understand, how the EBR will change, but also improve the ways of working without too much challenge to implement, because of the experience, and having done it themselves in the trial, they're much more comfortable with that.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
Great. So any last thoughts, Neil? I think we've run through in terms of what is a trial, why companies are looking to do them, the benefits, and an overview about some of the things to think about in terms of when you're going to actually do one, and the involvement of your company in such an evaluation.
Yeah, you can follow our guide, our thoughts, you don't have to follow it rigidly, but there's some useful pointers, I think, in our guide to how to set up and run a trial, how to decide whether you need to do it or not. I think work your way through those and make it right for your company. But overall, put a bit of thought into it and a bit of planning, a little bit of structure, and I think you'll have a very successful trial.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks again, Neil, for hosting this and providing your inputs. So thank you for that input, and hopefully this is interesting to our viewers and our customer base as well. So we'll be excited to look for the next article and next blog as we develop further guidance around implementing EBR. So thank you, everybody, and thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers. Have a good day.